This is Ekta and welcome to Reader Kitabs Live. I'm sorry for the past video. There was a technical glitch and I had to end it. But yeah, welcome to this live, and we are extremely excited, like always, to have Manreet with us today, and very interesting conversation that we're looking forward to. And this is in regards to our book of the month that we had this time, which is Lahore, and talks very hugely about partition literature. Hi everyone. Hi Balu. Hi Janak. Hi Neeraj. Hi Abhishek. Hi Shan. Mayuri. Hi everyone. So so I think we'll just begin shortly. In the meanwhile, till we will take it up from there. I have just sent an invite to Neeraj. So hi Neeraj, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, and thank you for joining us today. And I'm waiting for Manreet to join us. And we'll just give it some time. But what an incredible month this has been! Reading about partition literature, reading about literature from the war-struck country, and so much about the freedom moments, and acting on that. We did a lot of acts together, so it was such a wonderful time to have gone through this entire month of August and done this activity and read so much literature on it. It is always fascinating to go through and read all of this. So how was it about you?
It was an absolutely incredible experience because reading a book, it's a very solitary thing, isn't it? You just pick up a book, you read it, and you just spend time on it. You reflect on it. However, this time around, we, like you said, we got together and we exchanged a lot of thoughts, and not just that, we created an act also, which we were very privileged to present in front of the live audiences, and that was such an incredible experience. The topic was on freedom, voices and voices, and yeah, like you said, it was incredibly exciting to put all our heads together and to look at what freedom means to people, what oppression, discrimination means to people from various perspectives. So it was very exciting for me.
Absolutely, and what a brilliant book this was, and I'm definitely waiting for its third part, Kashmir. So, very wonderfully written Lahore, and the second part of it, Hyderabad. I'm sure it talks, it goes down a lot of memory lane, and also kind of talks so much about what has happened in the partition and how it still has put a mark in our lives, and we are still kind of recovering out of it. But I'm very excited to talk to Manreet today and, discuss with her about her book, her trilogy, her previous works that she's done. And I think that's going to be really an incredible experience.
Incredible experience, absolutely. And apart from just being a fiction, I mean, it is a very well written book. It has so many characters with so many different shades. However, there were a lot of facets of history that I was not really aware of. That these things happened, and how incredibly difficult it must have been for people who were involved. I mean, for people who have read this particular book and who are also aware of the combined history that we share with our both the neighbors. I was not really aware of most of the things that happened and how it affected the lives of individuals, common people, and on the other hand, how it affected. I mean, how incredibly under pressure all of these great leaders of those time were. I mean, it's 2023, and I think it's very easy for us to look back at past and talk about it. However, I'm very sure that they were trying to draw lines, invisible lines that were actually are so concrete that we all can feel those lines still today, isn't it? So
And I was also wondering while reading this that how important these narratives are, because a lot of it goes just kind of missed out or is lost in the in all of the times that we are reading, there is so much of literature that is available, and we are reading so much about different things. We read a lot about World War I, World War II, but when it comes to partition literature, I think though there are some very incredible books that are written on it, somehow, I have not read a lot of it. And then of late, since last 3-4 years, I started picking up books on partition, and started reading them. And I find that there is a common tie. There is a whole connect that you can relate yourself to, because perhaps you are one born in this country. Maybe later you have not seen the tragedies of partition. You have
I
not envisioned what has happened. Yeah.
Absolutely. I was going to point this out. I think maybe this generation which is actually writing about the partition, maybe they can write about it as objectively as possible. I mean, I found this book really taking no sides absolutely, and I found it such a well balanced narrative. It's not trying to place blame on anything. It is not trying to rewrite history. It is just trying to present what people must have felt. So I think it's also very important that it is historical fiction, and the generation that did not suffer can actually look back at it and write about it objectively. They can research on it, write about it objectively. And there are so many questions I have for the author, Ekta. I can't really wait.
Yeah, I think she's facing some technical glitch, and I think she's not able to join us. But I think she's trying at her side. So
Uh,
let us just wait it
sure.
out. I was also wondering, since all of this entire genre, comes up with a lot of research, and there is a lot of hard work that goes,
Absolutely.
while writing this. It is definitely incredible when we see such things. We really feel that there's a lot of hard work that has gone behind it. There is so much of tragedy that all of this goes. So I am always amazed, or I'm always kind of under the thought process that what would have gone in the writer's head while writing such a story. Because when we read such narratives, it still, I still remember when I was reading this book. I was reading a lot of other books on partition literature, and it gave me goosebumps, and I was sad to the core. So I was just wondering how difficult it is for a writer to bring on and write all of those tragedies on paper. I'm really amazed by that. I have so many questions
Yeah,
to ask to Manreet, and
absolutely. In
yeah.
fact, there are so many so many things to unravel that it must be really a very tough job to pick up certain narratives and leave not try to include. Otherwise, it would become just like a 1,000-page book, so on and so forth, isn't it? So, in fact, that is one of the questions I had for the author. Like how easy or difficult it was to focus on one particular story and leave out the many other stories. So that would be interesting.
Absolutely. I think Manreet is facing some problem and she's not able to join us. I'm just trying to add her. Allow
Okay.
me a minute. Or maybe I'll just try, and in the meanwhile, if you can talk to the audience, Neeraj, I'll just try
Yeah,
and connect with Manreet.
absolutely. I'll do that. So, hello everyone. Welcome to yet another author talk that we are having, and we're absolutely delighted to be in conversation. Look at the wonderful cover we have. All right, the name of the book. It's part one of the trilogy. The name of the book is Lahore by Manreet Sodhi Someshwar, and what can I say about this book? It's very fast paced also. So from the point of view of a reader, if you think it's very fast paced, the chapters are really small, so it really gets it's an engaging narrative as well. It's not very heavy because the topic is very heavy, and I think I'm actually asking all of the questions right now itself because I have so many things to ask to the author. Uh, and I'm really looking forward to reading the second part, which is on Hyderabad, and the third part, which would be coming out very soon.
Okay,
So,
I think Manreet is there. I can see
yay!
her. Oh,
Finally,
finally, I think she is able to join us. Let me just send her a request to join. I hope I am able to do that. Yes, I am. Okay.
but look at the mesmerizing cover. I mean, it is
Absolutely
right.
beautiful, gorgeous
It
cover.
is. It is. It's
Absolutely.
gorgeous.
Hi,
Hi,
Manreet. How are
hello.
you?
Finally, how are
Hi.
you?
Very well, thank you. How are
So,
you?
yeah, we are good, and we're so glad to have you here. And we can't express how happy we are after we've been reading so much from you and, so many books. And the club is really, really honored to have you today here. We are just, definitely very, very excited.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to join.
Thank you, Manreet. I am Ekta and he's Neeraj.
Hi,
And
hi.
we are here. So it's a
Do you
pleasure to be
run
here
the
today to
club
be talking.
together? Do you run the
Sorry?
club together, both of you?
Yeah, so we are a part of the club. I founded this club. Neeraj has been an incredible part of the club, since day one, and we've known each other since so many years. So, yeah, in a way,
That's
yes.
wonderful. That's wonderful.
So, Manreet, thank you so much once again for joining us. And there are a lot of people who were, we were waiting for you. So, we discussed, some questions which we were kind of, wanting to ask you.
No.
Just to begin, just to begin, such a lovely thing. And we were just talking about this beautiful book cover that we were reading this month. Oh, wow, this is amazing. So this beautiful cover book that we were reading this month as our book of the month, and we're definitely looking to the trilogy. Just to begin, just to break the ice, we would just want to understand from you. We were just discussing, how difficult it is to write historical fiction, and particularly when it comes to partition literature, because though we have not envisioned it on our own, but we have listened to those stories and we have been a part of that, somehow. So it's so difficult to read that literature because it gives you nightmares, I would say. So for a writer, how difficult it is to bring those stories on paper, and then we would love to hear that from you as well.
Okay. Well, that's a nice icebreaker question. Okay, so the way I answer this question is that I feel my writing, all my writing, Kashmir, inshallah, which releases later this year, is the third part of the Partition trilogy. I will complete the trilogy, and it's going to be my 9th book. So, and I've been writing for, since the turn of the millennium, so 23 years. But I didn't start off as a writer. I had a corporate career. I went to engineering school. I'm a Calcutta, and then had a corporate career for a decade. So I had no plans of becoming a writer. And this is really one of those things in my life which blindsided me. And I think when I look back, because, as a writer, especially of historical fiction, that's one thing you do all the time, which is you're trying to look back, connect the dots and see why what has happened, right? That's one of the things you do. And I think I became a writer because of my hometown. Now, I come from a town called Firozpur in Punjab. It is a cantonment town, which means it has been like a military camp for the longest time. And Firozpur actually, even historically, used to be a big garrison town, like since the time of Ranjit Singh and then the British after that. So, and I grew up in that town, and the sort of fascinating thing about Firozpur is that at the time of India's partition, it was a Muslim majority town. So by the laws of India's partition, it should have gone to West Punjab, which is now Pakistan. But it stayed within India. So if you look at the map of India and you look at the Radcliffe line very closely, he manages a squiggle around Firozpur. So Firozpur stays enclosed within East Punjab, which is India, as the line goes up. And now there is a lot of speculation about why it happened, why did Firozpur stay within, and some of it I do deal with during the Partition trilogy, but that's not the important thing. I think the important thing is that for me personally, is that my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, my Dadaji, they belonged to Firozpur town. So, they sort of, say, Hindi mein kehte pushteni, they come from that place. So therefore, they saw firsthand what the announcement of Radcliffe Line on the 17th of August did to the place. Also, my father's family were agriculturalists. At that time, in large swathe of Punjab, the landowners typically tended to be either, in West Punjab, there were some landed Muslim families, but in East Punjab, it was really the Sikhs who were the landowners, but the people who worked on the land were largely Muslims. And that was the case even with my grandfather's case. And literally overnight, they had to transport those workers and move them to across the Satluj, which is, forms the boundary for us with Pakistan and India. And they had to do it because what we call riots or communal violence had broken out. So to cut a long story short, I grew up with all these stories. Some of them were hushed, some of them were narrated at points of pain or difficulty. And I just, when you're a child, you don't pay attention to those things. They're a part of your background, right? They could be a or the tree or the garden. They're just there.
True.
And it's only much, much later, as I said, when I had moved out of India, or my husband had got relocated and we had moved out, and I took a sabbatical from work. So I actually gave myself this little period of calm, I thought, before I would join the rat race again. And that's when I realized that there was something which needed to be told. I had no, as I said, training in writing or, how to go about it, but I felt the urge to articulate what was going on through me. And I then started with writing a short story, and, that's how sort of it all went. But I have to say that it seized me so strongly that 6 months sabbatical became a year, and then I was just like, I'm going to write this and I'm going to see where it takes me. So, I've been on this journey for 23 years.
Wow. That is such a beautiful thing that you talked about. And also, I could relate to it to a certain extent, not directly, but yeah, indirectly. Like my paternal grandparents also come from Punjab, from Amritsar, which was the part of Amritsar which was previously in Pakistan, which was earlier in India, of course, and then moved to Pakistan. So it is now in Lahore. And have heard all these similar stories that you're talking about and how painful it is. But on the other hand, which I always tell everyone whenever we're talking about partition as a whole thing, or when we're reading partition literature. In fact, we had a lot of discussion this month also. I always heard from my grandmother saying that log bure nahi the, halat bure the. So they still don't blame what has happened, because they were so close to each other, they were so closely bonded that communalism was not something that was on their mind all the time. But when we look today and when we see that the people today, we have not envisioned any of it, but still there's so much of uproar, there's so much of angst or anger. So sometimes it feels like, are we really looking at the side of it, or we're just kind of faking it all?
I think that's a good question. So there's the philosopher Hegel said that the only thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. So I think that is that should be the overarching sort of theme for our narrative. But I do agree with you. As I said, I grew up in Punjab, in sort of deep in the heart of Punjab. And Sone Pe Suhaga was that during my adolescence, it coincided with what we call the period of Sikh militancy. And I'm a Sikh. I come from a Sikh family. My father was a lawyer. We were in a border town. And if you guys are much younger than I am, but if you the records, Punjab was considered Firozpur especially was considered the terrorist hotbed.
Yes.
So at that time, I remember the elderly people in the town saying, "Ye ta santali fir aa gaya." It's 47 all over again. So in a sense, certainly in Punjab, in the Punjabi psyche, there are two numbers which hold a lot of significance. You just have to mention them, and it's like a code word for this entire mythology that opens up. One is Santali, which is 47. The other is Churasi, which is 84.
Yes.
And I didn't live through the first one. I lived through the second, but the first one I carry within me. And I don't know how to put it. It may sound very dramatic, but I think I carry it in my bones and in my blood. And I feel that all of us Indians do. We may be the third generation, the fourth generation. We may say, my parents moved on. Or we are not Punjabi. I married, my in-laws are South Indian. I married into a South Indian family. And I tell them, like I told Hyderabad, because Hyderabad is very much a partition story of the Deccan. Yes. Then how do we say, in South India, we never saw anything to do with partition? It is such a it is such a lie. It is a lie we have told ourselves.
Absolutely.
So, we tell lies because they offer some comfort. We tell lies because we want to distort what is factual, what is the truth, because there is a picture that we want to present. And I feel that now, in the 76th year of India's independence and partition, it is important that we recall what had happened. And not for the sake of tutu meme or settling scores, because as you said, the people who actually went through partition are the ones who suffered the most and the ones who understand it the best. And because in Punjab, for instance, there was never any concept of ghettoization. You couldn't go to a place and say, "Ye Muslim mohalla hai, ye Sikh colony hai, ye Hindu ka hai." People literally lived cheek by jowl. They dress the same. From the surname, more often than not, you could not tell. A Malik could be a Muslim Malik, a Hindu Malik, a Sikh Malik.
Yeah.
So God was Rab. Then of course, whether he's Allah or Ram or Guru Nanak. I mean, Nanak is considered a peer by the Muslims.
Yes.
And he was worshipped by, obviously, but he's a Sikh guru. And even, it was a norm for the Hindus, the first son would be raised as a Sikh. Yeah. So my attempt with the Partition trilogy is to try and tell, hopefully through a story, through a narrative, show readers what the reality was like. I joke with my nieces and nephews that whenever you look at a hot spot, a troubled spot anywhere in the world now, and you put a finger on it and you start tracing it back, it goes back to that swampy, boggy island in Great Britain, England. A lot of the, partition didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It happened because the seeds of division had been sown as a strategy, as a calculated maneuver by the colonial overlords. And then it saw fruition in the partition. But the fact that 76 years on, we still haven't been able to move on suggests to me two things. One, that it is something which bothers us. It is like a constant itch. Imagine you have a pebble beneath your skin which doesn't let you sit still. You have to keep eating. So we have to acknowledge first that it is there. And then when we have to say, okay, so how do I deal with it? What do I do? And I think the first thing is to ask questions. What happened? We have to equip ourselves with knowledge, with the facts. And the truth may be a version, but the facts cannot be changed, right? I mean, things happened. And we have to know how they happened. So once we know how they happened, we can decide how we want to deal with it. And my attempt with the storytelling is really to tell people that, you can't say that, oh, this person is to blame, or this community is to blame, or this set of people are to blame. So just to, sort of illustrate it, when I was working on the Partition trilogy, and this obviously, as I said, I started with trying to write a story about Punjab and partition and sort of 84 being a repeat of 47. And I realized with each step how little I knew, how little I had paid attention to, despite the fact that I was surrounded with all this.
Yeah.
And that started my quest from trying to understand what had happened. So, which meant obviously spending time in the archives in the library and oral histories, talking to the people who had gone through this. There was a lot of pushback because nobody wants to remember traumatic times, that we live with that trauma, right? And I remember at some point after I had some breakthroughs, was talking to people, was making my own records and thinking, what am I even going to do with this? How do I even make sense of this? Like, you feel you may be a swimmer, but then imagine trying to wade through an ocean because there's just so much. But I just persisted. I kept with it, filling my audio cassettes and notepads. And I remember at some point in time, there was this elderly Sikh gentleman who I was talking to. And he said something and the penny dropped for me. Because he said, Puttar kise de haath saaf nahi. Which is Punjabi, but in English it really means that nobody's hands are clean. And I want people to really acknowledge that, to understand that, because, unlike very often when you're studying the partition narrative, it is commonplace to say it was what happened during the Nazi Holocaust. But it is not. Because during the Holocaust, there was a concerted, organized effort to eliminate a certain section of Germans, which was the entire army, the government behind it, right? But in the case of partition, the violence was done by neighbor against neighbor, by a family to its own women. You know, when you go through these records, there were men who lined up all the women folk from 8 to maybe 8 months and shot them dead because they were worried what would happen to the honor of the family. So what I'm trying to say is this violence is of a very different nature because it takes a lot of people to kill a lot of people when you do not have an army involved. That's one. It's also a very intimate kind of violence. It's a kind of violence when I've been seeing my neighbor and, you know, the women have shared not just chula, the women raise each other's children. When you've shared that kind of intimacy and then you kill that person, it's a very intimate violence. And you know, Ashish Nandi, who is a phenomenal sort of psychologist and who has analyzed this period, I urge people to read his essay, which is also available in a booklet form called The Intimate Enemy. And when you read that, you realize how violence, you know, we may assume, okay, I'm being violent, I'm turning a violence against this other person, but violence always rebounds. It always comes back to haunt you. Yeah. And which is again why 76 years later, we still haven't been able to lay the ghosts to rest. They are with us. And unless we acknowledge the ghost in the room and say, okay, I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to talk, I want to hear your story, and I want to tell you my story, we aren't going to get rid of it.
So true.
Yeah, and you know, if I may ask about the you know, taking back to the writing style, because I actually did not know how to deal with the book because the chapters are so short and succinct, and you know, so many things happen, and suddenly there is a very traumatic, which you, I mean, obviously people would be expecting it, but the details are so. I kind of felt that, you know. Is this how people felt also when it was happening with them, and was this a conscious decision on your part that, you know, it would be very difficult for you to recover from it? Only after, like you said, 76 years you'd be able to actually, you know, sit and process it. Oh, okay, this is what happened. Because if you talk about, especially in this book, what happens to the women characters, before I could process and recover from the description, there it was, we were in Delhi, and we were amidst all of these politicians making all of these strategic decisions. So I was just wondering about your writing style as well.
No, that's a very good question. See, with the Partition trilogy, there are two things I'm attempting. So one is to put on the same stage both what we call the elite, you know, the political elite, the leaders in Delhi, the subaltern, the Aam Aadmi and Aurat. So the idea is to show the decisions which are being taken in Delhi, how do they impact the people who are actually going to live with the consequences of that decision. So it starts with Lahore, because I'm trying to show the run-up to partition, and then I break off two princely states of Hyderabad and Kashmir who had not joined India. You know, we look at the map of India and assume, oh, this is the India the British left. I'm sorry, the British didn't leave us any map. The British left us a disjointed, 565 princely states, and what was ruled by the British directly as, to us, and we, as in the leaders, had to make sense of it and put India together. So that is one of the first things that I want people to understand. You know, this common assumption that is heard that, oh, Nehru gave Pakistan away. I mean, please read the Partition trilogy. You'll get a sense of it. So one is to put both of these parties together. I'm also trying to, therefore, show these people as protagonists, which means Jawaharlal Nehru is not just sort of these hallowed figure. He's not just the first Prime Minister of India. I want to show him as a person, as a father, as a leader, as a colleague. What are his personal struggles? How is he dealing with it? And that's why when you read the book, for me, he's not Jawaharlal Nehru. He's not even Jawaharlal unless he's being addressed by others, because that's how he was addressed. Vallabhbhai always called him Jawaharlal. But for me, he is Jawahar. And Vallabhbhai is Vallabh. You know, I remember when the first readers read it, he was like, oh my God, I can't even imagine this huge character, this Iron Man of India as Vallabh. But when Vallabhbhai Patel would look at himself in the mirror, did he see Sardar, did he see Vallabhbhai Patel, or he saw himself as Vallabh? You know, because we all know who we are. We know, we carry all ourselves with us. That 8-year-old, that 18-year-old, that 28-year-old, right? The entire continuum is with us.
Right.
So that was attempt to show these people as real characters and not just as polarized figures of, oh, if Patel had been the prime minister, this would have happened. So I'm trying to take you behind the scenes as a reader and show things as they are. The other thing I'm trying to do is really to capture the frenzy of the time. I'm trying to put you in Lahore and say, now imagine everyday rumors are floating. You could be a shopkeeper. You could be a coolie like Mahmood and Beliram at Lahore railway station. You could be a clerk like Ishan Singh in Lahore and have no idea. But you're dealing with these rumors. Every day new rumors are coming. So where is Lahore going to be? Where is Punjab going to be? What is Pakistan? Where does Pakistan get formed? And I want to show how people are just getting carried in this frenzy of that time. And, you know, sometimes people tell me, readers of Lahore, that there is no closure. And I'm like, really? Do we have closure after 76 years? What closure are we talking about? There are people who are still trying to wrap their heads around it. People who are now, you know, when I started speaking with these people who had witnessed 47, they were already, you know, in their 70s, 80s, maybe late 60s. Now, 23 years on, many of them have passed away. Many of them have slipped into dementia, you know, loss of memory. But there has been no resolution. You cannot just resolve these things. There is no closure. So, and I want the novels, all 3 books when you read, you'll find that sense of discomfort. It is not my job as a reader to give. It is my job as a reader, especially of the Partition trilogy, to shake you up if I can, and to make you look at this era with hopefully wide eyes and start questioning. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, actually, and you know, if I can just ask one follow-up question also, talking about the characters, one character is very conspicuously absent from the narrative. I just don't know whether it was a conscious decision.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Mahatma Gandhi ji. So he's just mentioned in dialogues, he's just mentioned in conversations, but he's really not a character. And I was wondering that you have Mountbatten, you have his wife and his daughter, Pammi or Pammy, like you call it in the right, and you have so many other characters, but Gandhiji is very conspicuous by his absence. So was it a conscious decision?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why. But that's again a good question. I like how, are you a budding writer or a writer yourself? Because I like how you look at structure and analyze it. That's a good question again.
Thank you. We both are basically budding writers as well.
Excellent. So. Yeah. So see now the thing is that I think a lot of ink has been spent in writing about Bapu, Mahatma Gandhi, and Jinnah. So I was very clear when I was thinking of the Partition trilogy that I do not want these 2 larger than life characters in the narrative. They would just suck up too much of the oxygen, right? So, and also the other thing is, if I'm being true to the time, then really Bapu's contribution had happened. So the Lahore and the Partition trilogy starts with February when Dicky Mountbatten, who's the last viceroy of India, arrives in India. By the time, you know, Bapu's great efforts have already paid off. By that time is when these 2 leaders, which is really Jawaharlal Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel, both as interim prime minister and deputy prime minister stroke home minister, really have to take the reins and say, okay, how do we make this very unwieldy cart run, park it in a certain place and start building the country? So that's why, you know, both Mahatma Gandhi and Jinnah I keep in the backdrop. I do not want to bring him in the picture because honestly, they do not have a role to play in this narrative. Now, somebody else, as a writer writing it, could obviously incorporate them, but that would be a very different book. So, you know, whenever any writer tackles a subject or a theme and says, how do I write it? Especially with historical fiction. Because, you know, history history is as large, as wide as anything, right? But the writer of historical fiction, like a landscape painter, has to decide what is my frame, what are the boundaries, because I have to draw it, because I'm not writing an encyclopedia partition. Even that would not be able to cover everything. So I have to decide, okay, this is a frame, because I'm also trying to tell a story. I'm trying to draw in readers and sustain their interest through story. So that is, so once a writer decides upon their framework, and then they say, okay, now how do I play with the characters in this framework? And also remember that in my case, especially with the Partition trilogy, I had to be very, very faithful, very accurate, with a great deal of integrity I have to render, certainly the common folks, but also these luminaries. I mean, these are not people I can talk about. I cannot attribute anything to Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, or Dicky Mountbatten without sort of the thought of a sedition case or something, being slapped against me. So one has to be careful, because there is truth that is at stake, and we have to render the truth, but we also have to tell it in the form of a story.
And with that, I was also kind of thinking that this collective amnesia that we are kind of forced upon in India. If you look at, wherein we don't want to remember what happened, or we are just kind of not asked to do that. And looking at England, wherein in the textbooks they've just wiped off as if it has never happened. There was no colonialism that has ever done, to the country, and kids now they don't know that their country has ever done that. So this entire act of collective amnesia that in today's times that is being tried to impose. I think narratives like these, when you were talking about that, you want people to just shake, get out of that slumber, wherein you just think that it has not ever happened, and acknowledge. So just wanted to ask you that, how do you what do you think, how important it is with, how important these narratives are, when, there are a lot of historians of today's generation as well, like, for example, Ira Mukhoti, Manu S. Pillai, who are writing, very incredible things about what India has been. So, this trilogy comes up, and also your previous books, wherein women protagonists have been the four frontiers, and they have been shown their very, head forward. So, how do you think that, this is going to change, a lot of things that are just happening right now? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. You know what? See, first is, it is not upon others to tell our stories, right? Britain has no interest in telling our stories. Why would they? It is a shame period. It is a black mark. It is an entire sort of black, whatever, on their face, on their whole, the story of the empire. But they're not the ones who are going to tell the story. So therefore, we have to seize our stories, and we have to tell them ourselves. Because if we don't, nobody else is interested in telling them. So that's one. And two, you mentioned women in the stories, and women are 50% of, sort of the world, and yet we always find ourselves in a minority. It's always the vulnerable, the elderly, the women and children. Like, what the hell? Since when did women become vulnerable? Of course, children are, elderly are, but why women? And I think it's very important for women themselves to start taking out a position, to occupy a space and say, here I am, talk to me, and I'll tell you my story. And also when, sort of you look at historical events, certainly during the telling of partition stories, during the oral telling, women are the ones who suffered the most.
Absolutely.
So why are they missing from our rendering of that history?
Sure.
History very often is his story, certainly in Indian narrative it is. And my attempt with my storytelling is to rebel against that. Because a lot of the common characters, for instance, that are there, the Aam Aadmi and Aurat, are composites of people I've actually met, or whose stories were told to me by their children, whose stories then I have poured into a composite sort of character. And, women had such tough choices to make during the time of partition violence, the choices of whether how to keep themselves safe, how to keep their children safe, the choice whether, okay, I can keep my child safe if I become a Sikh or a Muslim or a Hindu, I convert, and therefore I can keep my child safe. I mean, the kind of decisions that women had to take, women who were then brought back, whose families refused to take them. Should I stay? Should I go? And I feel that their stories need to be told. So, I absolutely, you could say it's my mission to bring women front and forward when I'm telling these stories. I also feel, I sit outside of India, and I've been outside of India for a while, but I travel to India every year. I still go back to Firozpur. My mother lives there, in the home that she and my father built. And there is a sense that 76th year of independence, and we are still sort of struggling with partition. We're still trying to work on an enemy, still othering people and saying, "Nahi, ye kharab hai. This community did this." It just baffles me. But I have to say that in the midst of all this, I do see some hopeful signs, some positive signs. Like earlier this year, I was in a book tour, and I actually did my own, as I say, Bharat Jodo Yatra, but in the reverse. I started from Amritsar with the Amritsar Literary Festival, then I went to Jaipur for JLF, then I went to Hyderabad for HLF, and then finally in Trivandrum for the Mathrubhumi Lit Fest. And I came across a lot of young people, people like you guys, maybe it's people even younger, school children. And I found that they all want to know about partition. And to me, that is a very hopeful sign, because I think my parents' generation, certainly my grandparents' generation, saw it too closely. There was just too much to process. So they did what any person does in the face of trauma. They just shut it off and said, I have a life, I have to move on. Otherwise, I will not be able to take a step forward. Then my parents' generation had to build lives, right? They had to start anew. I think my generation, I don't know, I think I was very fortunate because of where I come from, but most of them were in a fog. There was something called partition, but we always mark independence. We never commemorate partition, right? But I find it interesting. I think this fourth generation, or whatever, the 3.5 generation, 3.25 generation, I find them asking questions. I find them wanting to know. They're not like, ye hua tha, ye against hai, wo kharab hai, hua kya tha? And I think that's very good. And I always tell these people that, you have to start asking questions, because that's the only way that you will reach your own truth. Because there is no idea of like, ye hua tha. Start asking questions. Ask stories, talk to people who either, went through that event, witnessed it, or read literature, which is, a fascinating way to time travel, right? As J.K. Rowling says. And you will find your answers. You will read something which will give you satisfaction. And that, I think, is a beginning point. So I'm hopeful. I mean, I feel as a writer of historical fiction, it's an uphill climb because one, you can't write this without sort of delving in so deep into it. And many times I'm like, yeah, tumhari aankhein kyun band hain? Don't you know what happened? But they don't. So that's the job of a writer, through stories to make those stories relevant again.
Incredible. And, yes, Neeraj, of
Yeah,
course.
I was just also wondering about, there is another, history within history in this particular book also. A lot of times you mentioned the epic, the Mahabharata, right? And I was also kind of trying to think like, maybe people would also want to know like, hua kya tha? Exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And this is the ethos we have.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, when I started researching partition, I was astonished at the number of times that Mahabharata gets repeated in conversation. Certainly, it was a big concern of Mahatma Gandhi, who felt that the story of brother against brother we would see in partition, and it happened exactly that way. When after 15th August, when refugees started pouring in both ways, when the refugees from Pakistan came in, and a lot of them poured into Delhi, and they were sort of housed in Purana Killa. And Bapu went there and he said, this is the Mahabharata all over again, because according to the legend, the Pandava brothers actually sought refuge in Purana Kila. So, from conversations amongst political leaders, but even the common people, like, a lot of times the way we understand or we make sense of what is happening around us is through the stories we've heard before, which is typically our myths, our folk legends. And people said to grapple with the catastrophe of partition, they said, "Ita parle aagi ji." Parle is Punjabi for pralay. No, pralay comes from Mahabharata, when the churning will happen. And even when you read the letters of soldiers, World War II soldiers who are in some battlefield in Libya, in the desert of Libya, or somewhere in France, and they're writing back home, and they're comparing how, the bombs that fall are like Garuda. So for me, when I was writing the Partition trilogy, it seemed to make sense that I have to have this story, which is the story of all of us. And when I say all of us, it is really the story of the subcontinent and even Southeast Asia. Large parts of Thailand, Indonesia trace their cultural linkage back to the Mahabharata. So I thought it was a good scaffolding on which to start building my story of partition. And I think, in a sense, that is also the tradition of storytelling. Certainly, in a lot of cultures, certainly in the Punjabi culture it is, and if you are familiar with Bulle Shah, for instance, or Gulzar Saab, you do, in Sufi poetry, this is done very often. You take inspiration from another poet or writer, and then you add yours on it. So for instance, when Gulzar Saab does Chal Chaiya, 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 so that is really, he's paying homage or homage, if you want to use the French term, to Bulle Shah, who is the right? So you will see this over and over. You will see Faiz doing it, then Gulzar Saab paying. So that is, and I think that's the nature of storytelling. No story is born out of a vacuum. Neither is my Partition trilogy. And you could say it is also my attempt to pay both homage to this most essential of our stories, which is the Mahabharata, and also to make people aware that stories speak to each other, across time. And therefore, it is important for us to find our way into an understanding through stories if we can.
So beautiful, Manreet. I think me and Neeraj are kind of speechless listening to this. Because, this comes so close, this comes home actually. This hits so hard. Also, coming back to, you as a person. So like last time we were just having this author discussion with Marjan Kamali, who's the author for The Stationery Shop of Tehran. And
beautiful.
There is, yeah, absolutely. And, all of these Turkish, Iranian authors, which we keep on reading, Orhan Pamuk, Elif Shafar, they all talk about how, and we're seeing today what's happening to their land, which we have kind of envisioned. We've kind of come out of it. We've not come out, but we are actually maybe I can say we are in a better position. I don't know how subjective this would be, but yeah. So, there is a sort of, because these people have moved out of their countries and they're living abroad, living in a different country altogether. And there is just so much to accept, so much to move on to. So there is a sort of hyphenated existence, that is there, because you belong to a certain place and then you don't belong at all anywhere, you belong everywhere. So like you're listening to you, and also now this comes to me while I was just listening to you, that people who are writing historical fiction or are deep diving into history and researching, does hyphenated existence exist for you as well?
I think this question every writer will answer differently. So I'll try and give my answer. I've been asked before, like, you've lived outside of India. Why don't you write stories about the places you live in? I've lived in Singapore, in Hong Kong, now in New York City. Why don't you write stories of that place? And sort of it keeps coming back to that. I think for every person, who's a writer, stories spring from a certain space, right? There's a wellspring. I personally don't believe that anybody becomes a writer of their own choice. You know, it's a very tough profession. It doesn't pay you anything. I mean, it literally pays you peanuts, and yet it demands so much out of you. If you really want to take it seriously. So I remember, I met Gulzar Saab very early on in my career. I was fortunate because the first book that I started writing, which took me 9 years, is called The Long Walk Home, and it's an exploration of the 20th century history of Punjab, which is very tumultuous and almost has 100-year arc. So you could say I taught myself to write by writing historical fiction. But so Gulzar Saab was sent the book as a manuscript, and he read it and he gave me a blurb, and I was very happy for it. But I ended up meeting him, and he's a wonderful person. But he said something to me which has always stayed with me, and he said. And I think he was kind of trying to caution me, because it's like, oh, it's your first book, and you think you've written it, and don't let it go to your head, kind of thing. He didn't say any of that, but he said, and he I mean, he's like maybe my father, my grandfather's age, but he said he's very respectful, he's very affectionate. He said, Manreet ji, writing tapasya hai, इसे आपको तपस्या की तरह करना है. And it has stayed with me because it is that. So in some ways, it's a very ascetic sort of occupation, you could say, because, you sit in your pajamas at your desk and you write and you struggle and you're trying to make sense of this. You don't even know whether this struggle will translate into an actual manuscript, because many times, it doesn't go anywhere. You discard it, you start afresh. You don't know whether it will find a publisher. You don't know, having found a publisher, will it find reader? Will it find readers? They'll just, it's like trying to cast a stone out in the space and say, hopefully it finds a resonance. So it is, I don't think anybody becomes a writer out of choice. I didn't. I certainly didn't. Now, going back to your question of the hyphenated, I feel that, when people ask me, I feel I'm very much a Punjabi. I'm very much an Indian. I am also very much for lack of another word, what you would call a global citizen, in the sense I'm a person who's lived in places. And I have found that you can live and meet people who at first look you may think are so different from you. But at the end, we are all connected. Our concerns are the same, which is why good literature, for instance, can be read anywhere, right? If it's translated well, it can be read anywhere, because all our concerns, our preoccupations are the same. And therefore, I never think of myself as a hyphenated person. I think of myself as a person who has certain concerns that I want to explore through my writing. Obviously, with the Partition trilogy, for instance, I was very much looking at a South Asian audience, and that's why I'm not trying to explain anything. Now, if you're a sophisticated reader anywhere in the world, you can pick up the book and understand it. But I'm not trying to spoon feed. I'm not trying to make it easy. Yes. I'm saying, this is a story, run with it, because I'm trying metaphorically to pluck the reader and drop them into Lahore 1947 or Hyderabad or Kashmir and say, this is here you are, and now you found yourself here. This reality TV, go with it. What would you do? So yeah, and also I think the world we live in, there's such a large diaspora. In New York City, not a single day goes by when I don't encounter a Bangladeshi who's trying to find directions. Didi, idhar kaise jaane ka, or people will assume I am Hispanic and they start speaking Spanish to me. Or I get into a yellow cab and it is a Sardarji who sees my kada and says, Hanji kidda. What I'm trying to say is that if you're open and you see people for who they are, which is people, sans labels, it's not so difficult.
So true.
I can listen to you all day actually, and I forgot all of my rest of the questions as well.
I was about to say that. I was about to say that in India we can listen to you all night and we can talk to you all night. It is so soothing.
But talking about readership as well, you already mentioned that you have actually written a story. You're not doing any explanation, and you are just shoving the people in that particular place and just deal with it, right? So I was also kind of wondering, how was the reception internationally, especially in the USA, and how was the reaction of the readers, particularly to your book? I was just curious to know.
I think I hear from readers. I think it's largely been positive. I think it's also because largely it's been picked up by people who have some, sort of connection with India. Even if it's a non-Desi reader, it's because they are interested in partition and what has happened. There are a few times when it's a white reader who probably is not familiar with it, who say they found the story disjointed, and then it didn't work for them, and that's okay. I think. I believe that every book is not meant for every reader. That is why there are so many books in the library or in a bookstore. And I think we just have to be honest when we approach a book and say, does it work for me? If it doesn't, feel free to leave it and move on to another one. Because, the idea with books is always that the writer is trying to say, okay, hold my hand and I will lead you in. And if you are in the thicket and you start to enjoy yourself, then that's great. But if you don't, well, then there are other books to be picked up, right?
So Manreet, I mean, like I and Neeraj are just not able to get off it, and I actually forgot what I wanted to ask you now. with so poised thoughts, since we. I remember, I have still not finished reading Ravi Par by Gulzar Sahab, and I picked that, I guess, 7-8 years back, and I just could not read it, beyond few pages because it hits you so hard that it's so difficult to go ahead and read that book. And when I was reading Lahore and Hyderabad, I was just thinking that I'm not sure if I'll be able to pick up Kashmir and read it. I mean, it's heart wrenching. It's it breaks you. But how important these narratives are, and that is why we kind of wanted to have you as our guest who could talk about it, as a first-hand, discussion, and someone who's written, been a part of all of the research, and have gone through it, lived through it. So extremely, extremely happy once again to have you here today. And yeah, we're running out of time, but yeah, there are a few questions, quick questions, maybe rapid fire questions, which we want to ask you. So to begin with, just wanted to ask you, what are you reading currently?
Oh, I just finished reading a wonderful nonfiction book by David Grann. He's a New Yorker writer. It's called The Wager. It's about a ship which sails from Britain, our old enemy. and yeah, the British actually, it's set in the time when the British and the Spanish are fighting for supremacy over the waters. So the British ship is chasing, the goal is to chase a Spanish galleon, which is carrying, gold and bullion. And they actually have turned, take a turn at South America, which is where the currents are catastrophic. And this is an account how the shipwreck happens and what happens after that. And it's just brilliant storytelling. It's narrative nonfiction. And, if people who are interested, I would always encourage them, because Gran is a wonderful writer. He really brings a 400-year-old period alive. And I'm not a sailor. I don't particularly like being on boats, but I was into the story.
Wow.
And who is your favorite author?
Oh, come on. I can't have.
I know, it's an unfair question. I know.
I can't have a favorite author. I have so many, but I have to say that in terms of inspiration, I feel that to be a poet is sort of the greatest accomplishment any wordsmith can have, and I have a great deal of admiration for poets. And I draw a lot of inspiration from two of them especially. One is Bulle Shah, because Bulle Shah is sort of woven into the fabric of Punjab and Punjabi and Punjabiyat, that when I was growing up, I was much older when I realized that Bulle Shah is actually a person. It is not just, Bulla ki kehna main ko. Like, Bulla is not just a word which is thrown in, it belongs to a person. The other is Mirza Ghalib. I am a huge fan of Mirza Ghalib, Urdu, Shairi, and I draw a lot of inspiration from both of them.
So amazing. And Manreet, any book that you would want to recommend our readers to pick up next and read? Some of your favorite books, if you want to talk about that.
You know what? I actually do, because just yesterday, as it happens, you get down this rabbit hole of some stupid Twitter, social media controversy. But anyway, so I got drawn into something where, people were talking about Thomas and how a performance of Thomas has been postponed. Somebody found problems with it. So I urge everybody actually to read Thomas. If you can read in Hindi, read the original.
It's a fabulous book. Oh my God.
And Bhisham Sani is just such a tremendous, brilliant writer. So please read it in Hindi if you can. If you can't, then there is this lovely English translation. Many people have done, but Daisy Rockwell, who shot to fame last year with
Yeah.
a
Tomb
translator
of
of
Sand.
and has done a lovely translation. I think it's available from Penguin. And of course, if you are an audio-visual kind of person and cannot just bring yourself to read, then watch Govind Nihalani's wonderful TV series, Thomas. And I feel that if there was one classic of partition literature, there would be in English, Train to Pakistan, in Hindi, I would say Thomas. People should have to read these two narratives, certainly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Manreet. And before we kind of conclude this, if you have anything that you want to ask us, and I hope we made you feel home, with this conversation, and we so loved having you. We are all, happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a joy to see people engaging with books. So I'm so glad that you guys have a book club and that you're talking about books, and kudos and more power to you. So I wish you the greatest good luck going forward, reading books and inviting authors over. I have one last thing to say, because there's something you mentioned in terms of how heart-wrenching the books are, especially the Partition trilogy. And yes, absolutely it is. But what I'm also trying to do here is that I'm trying to tell, when trauma happens, it's not that trauma is the only thing happening. People are still leading their lives. So there are friendships, there is love, between genders, across genders, for mothers, for a child. And I'm trying to make sure those stories are also there, like in the Partition trilogy, in Lahore, in Hyderabad, in Kashmir. So, when people pick them up, they should know that there is a fair bit of pain and difficulty which has to be traversed in the terrain, but there are also stories of love and friendship, because I truly believe that at the end of the day, the only magic in the world is love. So, and that is sort of at the heart of the Partition trilogy as well.
What a beautiful way to, put this. And thank you so much for writing such honest and important narratives. And I think readers will always be grateful to you, for bringing up these stories and, giving us a chance to read what we have not seen and, experience and also feel what has happened. So I think these are these are extremely important narratives. So thank you so much, Manreet, and we are so glad to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Lovely
Have a
to
great
meet you.
day ahead.
Have a great day
Have a
ahead.
great evening. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.